The number is 54. That is how many times the word hell appears in the King James Bible. 54 times. In sermons, in warnings, in some of the most famous sentences Jesus ever spoke. It is one of the most preached words in Christian history, and it does not exist in the original languages. Not in the Hebrew, not in the Greek, not in a single manuscript. The word hell is not there. What is there? What Jesus actually said is something far stranger, far older, and far more specific than any translation has ever suggested. Because the word Jesus used was not a concept. It was not a theological abstraction. It was not a symbol invented to make sinners afraid. It was an address, a real place, south of Jerusalem, close enough to the temple courts that you could stand on the southern wall and look down into it, a place every person listening to him already knew, not as a doctrine, as ground. A narrow valley whose name carried the darkest memory in the history of Israel, a memory so heavy that a king once cursed the ground itself, so it could never be used again. When Jesus said this word, and he said it 11 times, his audience did not imagine fire and brimstone in a supernatural realm. They turned toward a valley they had passed 100 times. And that changes everything about what he was warning them about. This is not a story about finding a loophole in doctrine. It is not about softening a hard teaching. It is about the difference between a concept and a location, between a metaphor invented by translators and a real place that Jesus' audience could walk to in 20 minutes. Here is what the Greek actually says. Here is what the archaeology found. And here is why the English word hell may have quietly changed the meaning of the warning entirely. To understand what Jesus said, you have to stand where he stood. 1st century Judea, Roman occupation, the city of Jerusalem at the center of everything. The temple still standing, still gleaming, still drawing pilgrims from across the empire every time the calendar turned toward a major festival. Jesus was not speaking to theologians. He was not speaking to people trained in Greek philosophy or Roman rhetoric. He was speaking to Galileans, fishermen, farmers, women who carried water from communal wells, tax collectors who knew the Roman system from the inside, Pharisees who had memorized the Torah from childhood and could quote the prophets in their sleep. These were people who knew the Hebrew scriptures. Not in translation. In the original, they knew the prophets, they knew the kings, and they knew, every single one of them, the history of a valley that sat just outside the southern walls of Jerusalem. Its name in Hebrew was Gehenna, the valley of the son of Hinnom. The books of Kings record what happened there. In the reign of King Ahaz and again under King Manasseh, children were passed through fire in this valley as offerings to a deity called Molech. The ancient records describe a site called Tophet, a place of ritual burning, located in this valley, just beyond the edge of the city. The horror of it was so complete that the prophet Jeremiah was sent to stand there and deliver one of the most devastating pronouncements in the entire Hebrew Bible. Chapter 7, verse 31. God speaking directly about what had happened in this place. They have built the high places of Tophet in the valley of Ben Hinnom to burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I did not command, nor did it enter my mind. Then King Josiah came, and in the sweeping reforms recorded in 2 Kings chapter 23, he desecrated the Tophet. He defiled it, deliberately, permanently. The kind of ritual uncleanness that under Jewish law could never be reversed. The intention was clear. This place would never be used for worship again. But Jeremiah was not finished with the valley. He prophesied that its name would change, that the days were coming when it would no longer be called Tophet, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter, a place where the dead would be buried until there was no room left to bury them. And so the valley became something no other place on earth was, not just defiled ground, a verdict written into geography, the one location where the worst evil Israel ever committed, and the certainty of God's judgment occupied the same physical space. In the centuries between the Testaments, Jewish writings outside the Bible, documents like the Book of Enoch, which is not scripture, but is a window into how Jews of that era thought, described an accursed valley beside Jerusalem, where the wicked would face judgment in the sight of the righteous. The geography is unmistakable. It is the same valley. By the time Jesus was born, the transformation was complete. The Hebrew Gehenna had been compressed into a Greek shape, Gehenna. Gehenna, a place name that had become a sentence. And when Jesus stood before a crowd and warned them, when he pointed at consequences, at endings, at what happens when a life moves in a direction it cannot come back from, he did not reach for an abstraction. He reached for the one valley every Jew in his audience had been taught to fear since childhood. But here is something most people never consider. Because the story you have probably heard about this valley, the burning garbage dump, the fires that never went out, the smoke on the horizon, is about to get complicated. The archaeology has something to say about it, and it is not what you expect. The valley still exists. You can walk it today. It is called Wadi Rababi now, the Arabic name for the same ancient formation. It curves along the southern and western edges of the old city of Jerusalem, just below the ridge where the city of David was built. If you stand on the edge of Mount Zion and look south, you are looking directly into it. Archaeologists have worked this valley for over a century. The Israel Antiquities Authority has documented the site extensively. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, whose excavations of Jerusalem in the 1960s reshaped our understanding of the ancient city, worked in areas adjacent to the valley's boundaries. Gabriel Bakay, one of the most significant biblical archaeologists of the last 50 years, has mapped the burial traditions and ritual topography of the surrounding area. His work on the Hinnom Valley tombs produced some of the oldest surviving fragments of biblical text ever found. The Ketef Hinnom silver scrolls, dated to the 7th century BCE, bearing the priestly blessing from the Book of Numbers. Stop on that detail for a moment. The oldest words of the Bible ever found, the blessing, "May the Lord bless you and keep you," were discovered on the rim of the cursed valley. The place Israel remembered for the burning of children preserved in silver, a prayer for protection. Archaeology does not usually write poetry. Here, it did. But now comes the question this entire episode turns on. If you have ever heard a sermon about Gehenna, you have probably heard this: that in the time of Jesus, the valley of Hinnom was Jerusalem's garbage dump. That fires burned there day and night, consuming the city's refuse. That when Jesus said Gehenna, he was pointing at the smoke. It is vivid. It is preachable. It is repeated in commentaries, in pulpits, in documentaries. And here is what almost nobody says out loud. Archaeologists have never found it. No ash layers from the 1st century, no burn pits, no refuse deposits. A century of excavation in and around the valley has produced tombs, quarries, and burial complexes, but no trace of a burning municipal dump in the time of Jesus. The written record is just as silent. Josephus, who described Jerusalem in obsessive detail, its walls, its gates, its festivals that swell the city with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, never mentions it. The New Testament never mentions it. The rabbis of the Talmud never mention it. The earliest known source for the garbage dump tradition is a commentary by Rabbi David Kimhi, written around the year 1200, in France, more than 1,000 years after Jesus. Some scholars still argue a version of the story could be true. Absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. But the honest answer is that we cannot verify it. And here is the part that matters. Jesus did not need a garbage dump to make Gehenna terrifying. What the evidence does support is older and darker. A valley where children had burned. A royal desecration. A prophet's promise that it would one day be called the Valley of Slaughter, packed with the unburied dead. The phrase Jesus quotes in Mark chapter 9, "Their worm does not die, their fire is not quenched," comes directly from Isaiah 66 verse 24. Isaiah was writing about corpses left outside Jerusalem after a final judgment, bodies without burial, decay without end. The image was never about garbage. It was about judgment, rendered in the geography of a real valley. Jesus, 7 centuries after Isaiah, reached for the same line, about the same valley. This is not metaphor layered over metaphor. This is a place, and yet the word Gehenna is only part of what your Bible has translated as hell, because there are 2 other words underneath that single English translation. 2 other Greek words that mean something completely different from Gehenna and from each other. And when you see what the translators did with all 3, when you see how 3 completely different words with 3 completely different origins all collapsed into a single term, everything shifts. That is where we go next. Open a Greek New Testament, search for the word hell. You will not find it. What you will find in every place your English Bible says hell are 3 separate Greek words, 3 words with 3 separate origins, 3 separate contexts, 3 separate histories. Gehenna, Hades, Tartaros. Your translation collapsed all 3 into one. Gehenna you already know. It is the valley. Gehenna appears 12 times in the New Testament, and 11 of those 12 come from the mouth of Jesus. 11 times Jesus points at a geographical location, a real valley south of Jerusalem, saturated with the memory of the worst thing Israel had ever done, and with the prophet's promise of what it would become. 11 times. Not a realm beyond death, a valley you could see from the city gate. The 12th New Testament use of Gehenna appears in the letter of James, chapter 3, where the same geographical image is used to describe the destructive power of a careless tongue. That is Gehenna, specific, anchored, real. If this kind of investigation is what you come here for, the original language, the archaeology, the questions most people never think to ask, subscribe now. There is more coming, every week. And the next one may be the most surprising yet, now. Hades. Hades is different. Hades is the Greek word for the realm of the dead. It does not come from Jewish theology. It comes from Greek cosmology, from Homer, from Plato, from the entire framework of Greek thought about what follows death. In that framework, Hades was not a place of punishment. It was simply where the dead went, all of them, the good and the wicked alike. The Hebrew equivalent, the word the Old Testament actually uses, is Sheol, a shadowy underworld, a place of waiting. Neither reward nor punishment in its original conception, just the place of the dead. When the New Testament uses Hades, it is drawing on that tradition. The parable of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke chapter 16 uses Hades, not Gehenna, not the valley south of Jerusalem, the realm of the dead, a word with Greek philosophical roots and a Hebrew antecedent that predated anything Jesus ever said. In the King James Bible, Hades became hell 10 times. The same English word used for the valley, the realm of waiting and the place of warning, merged into one. And then there is Tartaros. Tartaros appears once in the entire New Testament, 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. It is used to describe where fallen angels are held in confinement. The word comes directly from Greek mythology. In Homer's Iliad, Tartaros is the deepest abyss beneath the underworld, a place so far below Hades that Hades itself is merely the surface above it. The author of 2 Peter reached into Greek cosmology to describe a confinement so total, so final, that no existing Jewish term could carry the full weight of it. Your English Bible says hell, 3 words, 3 different origins, 3 completely different images. one English translation. And here is where this stops being a linguistic exercise. Because if Jesus used Gehenna, a real, visible valley, 11 out of 12 times to describe what we call hell, then the dominant image he was working with was not an invisible supernatural destination after death. It was a place his audience could see, a place that held in one narrow stretch of ground everything Israel knew about how far a people can fall, and what God ultimately does about it. That is the image, not a realm of punishment in the afterlife described from the outside, a kind of ending available in this world, a trajectory that leads somewhere, and that somewhere is the valley of slaughter, the fire that is not quenched, the worm that does not die. It is a warning, and it is far more unsettling than the abstracted theology the word hell has carried for centuries. Because a warning about what a person can become, what a community can become, is harder to dismiss than a warning about what happens to you after you die. The threat is not in the future, it is available now. And then comes the part that changes everything, because the early church read the same Greek and saw the same three words. So, where did hell come from? The answer is not Hebrew. It is not Greek. It is not even Latin. And when you find out where that word was born, you will never read those verses the same way again. The early church knew there were three words. The scholars who came after the apostles, the men who read Greek as their native language, did not confuse Gehenna with Hades. They did not confuse Hades with Tartaros. The distinctions were visible, documented, discussed. Origen of Alexandria, writing in the 3rd century, was one of the most formidable biblical scholars in the history of Christianity. He read the texts in their original languages, he traced each word, and he concluded that the fire of Gehenna was not torment without purpose or end. He read it as something closer to a refining fire, a process with a goal, a judgment that accomplishes something, rather than a condition that never resolves. He was later condemned for several of his teachings. The Church of the 6th century formally rejected his conclusions. His legacy is deeply contested, and much of what he taught does not stand. He is not cited here as an authority. He is cited as evidence. Evidence that the meaning of these words was an open debate inside the early church, among men who read Greek as their native language, centuries before English existed. Most retellings of this story blame Jerome. In the 4th century, Jerome translated the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, the text that would define Western Christianity for over 1,000 years. And the assumption is that this is where the three words collapsed into one. But open the Vulgate. Something surprising happens. Gehenna is still there. Jerome did not translate it. He preserved it. Gehenna, letter for letter, the valley's name intact in Latin. And Tartaros is still there too in 2 Peter. A monk reading the Vulgate in the year 1000 could still see that Jesus was naming a place. The collapse happened later, and it happened in English. Because the word hell was never a translation at all. It is an Old English word, hell, and it comes from Germanic mythology. Hell was the pagan realm of the dead, and in the Norse telling, it was the name of the goddess who ruled it. When the first English translators sat down with the text, Wycliffe in the 14th century, Tyndale in the 16th, the King James Committee in 1611, they reached for the word their own ancestors had used for the pagan underworld. And they used it for everything. Gehenna became hell, Hades became hell, Tartaros became hell. And in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word Sheol, 31 times, became hell. 3 Greek words and 1 Hebrew word, 4 separate images, collapsed into a single term borrowed from the mythology of Northern Europe. And once they became one, the distinctions the original writers had drawn between a cursed valley outside Jerusalem, a Greek realm of the dead, and a mythological abyss for fallen angels disappeared into a single unified concept, wearing imagery imported from somewhere else entirely. This is not a fringe argument. David Bentley Hart, whose translation of the New Testament is one of the most linguistically precise in the modern era, argues directly that mainstream Christian doctrine built its understanding of hell on a translation that obscured what the Greek was saying. His work is contested. The conversation is not over. But the conversation is real. None of this resolves what the New Testament says about judgment, about consequence, about final things. Those passages still exist. The language of consequence in the New Testament is real and cannot be explained away. But the word hell, with all the iconography it has accumulated, does not appear in the original text. Gehenna does, 11 times, pointing south, toward the valley that was real, that is still there, that any tourist to Jerusalem can walk through today, looking up at the ridge of the old city, standing in the place that Jesus used as his image for the worst a life could come to. We started with the number 54. That is how many times hell appears in the King James Bible. Now you can do the math yourself. 31 of those are Sheol, the Hebrew realm of the dead. 10 are Hades, its Greek counterpart. 1 is Tartaros, the abyss of Greek mythology, holding fallen angels in a single verse of 2 Peter. And 12 are Gehenna, a valley south of Jerusalem, a real place that carried the memory of the worst thing Israel had ever done. And the prophets promised that it would one day be called the Valley of Slaughter. 11 of those 12 came from the mouth of Jesus, the 12th from the letter of James. 4 different words, 4 completely different images. 1 English word borrowed from Norse mythology, covering them all. The question is not whether there is judgment in the New Testament. There is. The question is not whether Jesus spoke of consequences, of endings, of what becomes of a life that moves in a direction it cannot come back from. He did. 11 times he pointed at a valley. The question is whether the word hell, as it has been understood, preached and feared in Western Christianity, reflects what Jesus actually said when he stood before a crowd and named the valley. The evidence says, not exactly. And the gap between what he said and what we heard is a gap worth standing in. That is what this channel exists for. Not to dismantle, not to comfort, to look at the actual words in their actual languages and stay with the discomfort of what they really say. If that investigation is what you want to keep following, subscribe. Every week another original word, another layer of history, another question that looks simple until you pull at the thread. This video was made possible by you. Every episode takes many hours of research, digging through archaeological records, ancient manuscripts, and sources most people never see. If you want to support this work and go deeper, you can join the hidden archives on our membership page. Members get access to the full research behind every episode, the sources, the original texts, the details that don't fit in a 20-minute video. It is the unseen layer beneath the unseen Bible. But please don't feel obligated. Watching this video, leaving a comment, sharing it with someone that already matters more than you know. We are grateful you are here, and next week we pull at the thread directly underneath this one, because Gehenna is only one of the 3 words. And Hades, the realm of the dead, has a Hebrew ancestor far older, far stranger, and far less understood than most Christians have ever been told. The Hebrew word is Sheol. And what the Old Testament actually says about Sheol, what it says about God's presence in that place, about what the dead experience, about what the psalmists believed when they wrote about death, is one of the most unexpected things in the entire biblical text. That is next week. Do not miss it.